It's Saturday, it's Scotland, and it's 1 p.m. That means we're back in original form, the legible, credible, inevitable storm, which is a force for good, coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. So we're broadcasting on YouTube and we're broadcasting on Facebook. Now we're going to be on Facebook for about 20-25 minutes, and then we're going to switch over exclusively to YouTube because we want to get our viewing figures and our subscribers up on YouTube. That's the big platform, the big worldwide platform that we really need to develop. Davey's watching from Bangor. Good stuff. Stephen says, good afternoon. Grant says, all right to you too. Ewan is watching, and Danny's from sunny Govan, not so far away from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow. Ian says hello from Aberdeenshire. And Christopher, good to see you again. Christopher, like to see you here every week. You're a great supporter, and wishing you all a fine Unionist Day. And it is quite a good Unionist Day out there if we don't think too much about the COVID lockdown, which once again our politicians of all parties are subjecting us to. And we're going to be speaking about that today. That's for the first part of the program. And then when we switch over to YouTube, we're going to be talking about how on earth are foreign citizens allowed to vote in Scotland? How on earth did that happen? Where did that come from? Who voted on that? And what's that all about? And we're going to be laying down that story because this is a long-running one, and this has been going now since 2014. And we're going to talk to you about that later in the program. Mother, daughter of Zeus, is watching from London. Good to see you. Morwina says hi to you, Morwina. Good to see you again. Glad to see you over here on YouTube. And Leslie from Airdrie, the great British town of Airdrie. Paul is watching. Robert Trieber says they want to control us. Well, it seems like that. And James is from sunny Greenock. Well, glad to see the sun is shining in Greenock today. That's wonderful. Nelson, of course, good man, South London, from the great London. Graham, allow Scots to vote who live all over the UK. Well, yeah, that's a good point. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, what we're going to start with is the crazy COVID lockdown, which once again has been imposed upon us all, especially here in Scotland, where Nicola Sturgeon has closed the pubs from 6 o'clock, although you can sit in the pub and drink Coca-Cola up until 6 o'clock, because apparently COVID is only spread when people are drinking alcohol, it seems. Well, do you know what? To be serious for a moment, it really is unfair for these establishments, because we go about our daily work here in the centre of Glasgow, and we see these pubs and restaurants and cafes doing their best to comply with all the weird regulations that are put upon them, whether it's one-way systems or wearing masks or queuing outside or getting taken to your table, all that kind of stuff. These pubs and clubs and restaurants have put a lot of effort and a lot of money to get this right. And how are they rewarded? They're rewarded essentially with a slap in the face. They're rewarded with a slap in the face, and all the money and the time and expenditure that they have done is simply unrewarded, and now they're closed down again. And some of them will not be recovering from this. Some of them will not be recovering from this. And it's the politicians who have to carry the can, the politicians of all political parties. We're not going to be partisan here, because they're all to blame. There isn't any real proper political will among any of the parties to fight back against Sturgeon here. And she knows that, and she knows she can get away with it. But what she doesn't seem to realise is she's basically getting away with destroying the Scottish economy. And I do hope that Boris doesn't do the same in England, because again, that will just destroy the economy. You know, he talks about building back better. Well, if you want to build back better, don't destroy forward worse before you've even begun. Anyway, Neil Oliver was really good about that this week. He had an excellent interview on talk radio, and after the show's over, we'll put that link up. And he really summarised what a lot of us are feeling on this particular matter. And he called it another nail in the coffin for the hospitality industry, and that's a morbid but accurate way of looking at it, because let's face it, many of our towns and cities these days, the central economies depend entirely upon the hospitality industry, entirely. So you close that down, you close down the economy. And he was also pointing out as well, he used the analogy of a hamster on a wheel and says that we're going to be on this forever unless we break out into a new way of thinking. And, you know, I'm just going to rehearse the problems at the moment, but we will give you solutions to this, because there are solutions. There's solutions to absolutely everything. Thomas says, good afternoon. Good afternoon to you. Debbie says, hello. Good to hear from you, Debbie. So where shall we start with this? Well, the first thing we're going to start with is the extent to which politicians can only get us to comply through fear. And one of the few outspoken legislators that we have here in the United Kingdom is a chap called Lord Sumption, who used to be a Supreme Court judge, and he is really going to town on this, and he's probably the foremost voice, other than, say, Neil Oliver, on this matter. He says, authoritarian government depends on fear. Ministers need to spread fear to justify what they are doing and achieve compliance. You have 20 seconds to comply. Remember that from the RoboCop. That was the first time I'd heard the word comply, and it was pretty scary. And that's almost the sort of RoboCop society that we're entering. So everybody is demanding now of us compliance. So, as Sumption says here, we have the continual attempt to pretend that everyone is at risk, even if they are under 60 and in good health. And that's one way of doing. Other ways that they have to spread fear, and this is something that some people might not realize, but it's a little psychological trick. Do you see how they report the figures? Okay. Matt Hancock a couple of weeks ago said that there was now more than 100 cases per 100,000. Now, most people's subconscious mind, they hear 100 and they think that's quite a lot. But why did he say 100 per 100,000? That's 1 in 1,000. Okay, but the number 1 doesn't sound quite as scary as the number 100. So they'll say 100 in 100,000 instead of saying 1 in 1,000. And this week, the so-called cases have gone down, and it's now 50 in 100,000. Well, that's 1 in 2,000, but 50 is a bigger number than 1, so they say 50 in 100,000. So that's just a little way of scaring you that the politicians do. And pick up on that. Pick up on all these little psychological tricks. Another one is they use percentages, which I always think is crazy, because nope, very few people, unless you're a mathematician, knows what a 200% increase is, for example. Now, a 200% increase, and I had to look this up, that's actually a trebling. It's not a doubling. A doubling is a 100% increase. Or they'll say something like 67% of new cases are rising by 67%. What does that even mean? If you look it up, it means if there's 100 cases, there's now 167 cases. But for most people, I venture to suggest that's just gobbledygook when they talk in those terms. But percentage increases makes it sound so scary and so ominous. I think an accurate way of doing it is, rather than even saying 1 in 1,000, say that's 0.001%. That looks very, very, very small, and that's not so scary. But they won't do that sort of thing because it's all about the hype. It's all about the hype. And also, of course, good afternoon to Colin there, doing a great job. Well, we're doing a great job because of all you guys who are coming in and watching and helping and supporting. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, and so Lord Sumption makes the very good point about what is a case and what is an infection. And he wrote about this in an article, which I see we've just posted there on our thread. And he talks about, he says, about 90% of deaths, that's 9 in 10, have been of people aged over 70. Most are in their 80s and 90s. And as a little aside, I read that the average age of dying from COVID is actually higher than the average life expectancy in the United Kingdom at the moment. Anyway, Sumption points out these people matter and they are the ones we should be protecting. They are more than 1,000 times more likely to die of COVID-19. So why are the young and healthy having to bear the brunt of the government's measures? For example, I would suggest such as the young and healthy who go out to the centre of town on a Friday night. Well, he says young adults are driving the current rise in infections. But then he says, and I'm so glad he said this, he says, infections don't matter a row of beans unless they lead to hospitalizations. So an infection really is just simply having the antibodies to the disease or having a very mild case of it, such as a very mild case of the sniffles or the cold. For healthy people under 60, these infections rarely do lead to hospitalizations or deaths, and children and students face at a ridiculously low risk. Out of nearly 43,000 dead with COVID, just 41 have been under 25. And yet the government has interfered with their social and family life, disrupted their education, and destroyed job chances. Well, hopefully not, but could this be? It could certainly look like that. He says this is worse than unjust. It is just insane, absolutely insane. It's the hamster wheel that the politicians have got us on because of the way that they have chosen to address the COVID situation. Because at the end of the day, there are two ways of doing it. One is to lock down the entire country forever until you get a vaccine, which is what the present strategy is, or the other is to boost herd immunity and just get on with our lives and allow our natural immune systems to deal with that. These are two different ways of looking at it, and right now the entire political system is going with the first one. To an extent, actually, that it's quite ridiculous. And don't get us wrong, we know that COVID can hurt certain people in various ways, and we're very conscious of that. And indeed, in that regard, we do know of one of our supporters, Darren, who is in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I want to give a shout out to Darren and say, Darren, thank you so much for the support that you have given to A Force for Good, in also encouraging other people to come in and watch. And I do wish you, Darren, the very, very best. I wish you a great British recovery. And hopefully you'll be as strong as Donald Trump on Regeneron in a few days. So all the best to you, Darren. And I also want to thank your friends Mark and John for contacting me about you. And especially I'd like to thank Mark for one or two really, really nice things that he said about A Force for Good. And I'm just going to read them out. He goes, I enjoy the videos, the fresh take on all things British, but especially the historical education that emanates throughout them. Thank you. There's so much about our wonderful nation that I have still to learn that should never be forgotten or shredded apart the way these nationalists would love. Well said, Mark. And he goes on, he goes, thank you for that, as well as the critique and analysis that you cover in your content. We appreciate the fact you're constantly blending in what you do on Great Britain's history with its politics. It's nice to hear something upbeat and positive in amongst the doom and gloom we're force-fed, particularly from certain quarters, constantly. So thank you for that. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, John. And Darren, all the very best to you. And I know you'll be getting out the Queen Elizabeth Hospital just as soon as you can possibly can. So God bless you. Now, talking about back to the infections and cases again, in the Daily Mail in Scotland this week, when they were reporting upon the lockdown, they said that they were reporting Nicola Sturgeon, and they said a majority of health boards in the Central Belt are recording more than 50 cases per 100,000 of the population. Again, that's these funny numbers, 50 in 100,000. That's 1 in 2,000. Okay, that's 1 in 2,000. But big numbers makes it sound so much more scarier. On the very same page, over here, there's a report from the University of Edinburgh, where some professors have got together and they have said that the way out of any epidemic is herd immunity, which is when enough people in the population are infected that the virus can't spread anymore. So on one hand, you've got Nicola Sturgeon saying that aim is to keep infections down, and on the other, you've got the other side of the argument here, which is professors at Edinburgh University saying we need people to get infected so that we can develop herd immunity. So two completely clashing views. And the one that we're at the moment, which is the one that's supported by the entire political structure, we're not going to defend any political party on this one, is the lockdown strategy. And we would suggest that that's now gone, is the wrong strategy. But oh my goodness, the people who support that lockdown strategy support it with a vengeance. And there's various reasons for that. You know, here in Scotland, the Scottish nationalists, they love the fact that everybody is obeying the dear leader. They really do like that. They want, not all the Scottish nationalists, but certainly the Scottish nationalist councillors and politicians and legislators, they love the fact that, look, all these Scottish people are all doing what we're telling them. Isn't that wonderful? It gives them a thrill. Okay. And I know this for a fact, and you can see it in their tweets and in their comments. And last night, one of the councillors, SNP councillors for Govan Hill, actually drove up Sauchiehall Street, obviously to see the extent to which the people are complying with the dear leader's edicts. And she sent out a tweet last night at 9:08 of Sauchiehall Street, empty. And I don't like the tone of what she was saying here. I don't like the tone of what she said. She goes, Sauchiehall Street tonight. This is what these restrictions were introduced to achieve. I know it's hard, but it's 16 days to drive the virus back down so we can lift restrictions safely. Please stick with it over the coming weeks, won't you? Well, in other words, she has no conception that what she's just pictured there are businesses closing and people going out of jobs. And she and her miserable party are responsible for this, okay? And in 16 days' time, when people get let out back into the nightclubs again, guess what's going to happen? Cases are going to rise. So-called infections are going to rise. Of course they are. You're not stopping cases. You're just delaying the cases. You know, maybe I'm misremembering things or something, but I did biology in years 1 and 2 at high school. And this was basic stuff about how virus spreads. Basic stuff. Okay, so what's changed? How has the science changed since I was in the first year in high school? Okay. It just shows you sometimes these experts are not actually experts, and sometimes somebody in the first year of high school actually knows more than these experts. Anyway, and don't sit about waiting for a vaccine, you know, because somebody wrote into the Telegraph here saying that they started to try to develop a vaccine for smallpox in 1796, and it wasn't until 1980 that they regarded that they had actually got rid of smallpox entirely. And given the fact that you're going to need an extra 10 years to develop a safe one, then we can therefore expect COVID-19 to be defeated in about 2214, okay? And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in lockdown until then. Colin says, good afternoon, doing a great job. Thank you, Colin. Jonathan says, it's a bit strange. It seems that Western democracies are acting like communist dictatorships. That's certainly a point that others have also made. So what else is there to mention with the COVID thing? Yeah, I guess the bottom line is, at the end of the day as well, this, as we said last week, this could not have happened if Boris Johnson had kept control of the policy. Because what would have happened is he would have got his initial lockdown. People would have said, yeah, let's try it for a month. And then people in Scotland would have got upset with it. Nicola Sturgeon would have decided that it would be her interests to argue against the lockdown and to argue for herd immunity, as that fellow in Wales would have also argued against the lockdown. He would have sided with herd immunity, as would the Northern Ireland politicians, and Boris would have had to have said, yeah, okay, let's go for herd immunity. That would have been done months ago. But because he devolved all of this, what he set up was a game where all the devolved assemblies would try to outdo each other to see who's having the best lockdown, and to argue that Boris Johnson hadn't locked down enough. So this is one of the reasons why we're stuck into this, is because of the devolution of the crisis, which has given the devolved assemblies and administrations a reason to keep the lockdown going. If it had just been Boris sitting in Westminster trying to impose this throughout the United Kingdom, he would not have been able to do so. It's only happening because of the complicity of all the devolved administrations. Anyway, we are where we are. We are where we are. But here's the thing as well. If the MPs and the MSPs weren't getting paid for it, if the councillors weren't getting the money from the public sector, do you think that they would be as keen on this lockdown? Somehow I doubt it very much. Okay, so the politicians, if they had to take a pay cut every time they announced a lockdown, they wouldn't be so keen on it. They wouldn't be so keen on it, that's for sure. And at the end of the day, it's the media that will get us out of this, because the media are maintaining it. You know, it really annoys me when I see Glasgow newspapers or Edinburgh newspapers reporting on businesses that are going out of business, as if this is just happening as some sort of something that that newspaper can't do anything about. You know, yesterday the Edinburgh Evening News was talking about a cafe that went out of business, apparently. Yesterday it closed its doors for the final time. This was the cafe that J.K. Rowling wrote her original book in. It used to be called Nicholson's. Changed its name, got new owners, and it's gone out of business as a consequence of the lockdown. Well, that's a consequence of the Edinburgh Evening News not bothering to argue against the lockdown. You know, they are the biggest voice in Edinburgh. They are the evening newspaper. They should take a position for Edinburgh businesses and cafes and Edinburgh economy, and they should argue against it. And only when these newspapers develop the courage to speak against the Scottish National Party, only then will we start to be freed from these things. And that's easily enough done. As I've pointed out before, all the papers have to do is start to emphasize all the deaths from non-COVID that are occurring as a consequence of the lockdown and as a consequence of the NHS stopping certain important things that they would normally do, whether operations or scans or tests or so on. Once the newspapers start that angle, then people will start to change their opinions on things. But the newspapers have to do this, okay? They have to do it because they are the premier powers in these towns and cities, and they shouldn't be going along with this. So the media, the mainstream media I'm talking about, are as much to blame as the politicians. And it's extremely odd to see the mainstream media going along with the politicians, because normally they would not be doing that. Normally they would not be doing that. Gilbert said, would herd immunity also protect the sheep that go along with the SNP? Well, it would. So yeah, newspapers, please grow some courage and please make a stand throughout the United Kingdom for common sense and the correct way to deal with this in the long term. And one final thing before I end on COVID and before we head over simply to YouTube is some people have been concerned about how can we get more than 6 people around the Christmas dinner table. Well, that's fairly easy. You can just get 30 people around the dinner table. And if the police knock on your door and say, why have you got 30 people around your dinner table? You can just say, we're having a funeral for the turkey. And why not? And why not? Because times are crazy these days. Folks, we're going to go over onto YouTube and we're going to talk now about how can foreigners who are not British citizens or have no necessarily historical connection to the United Kingdom, how can they get to vote in Scotland and in Wales and in Northern Ireland? What on earth is all that about? And why is this not even the case in England as well? Well, we've got the answers for that and hope to see folks on Facebook. Please come over onto YouTube. There'll be a link up there on our Facebook page. Just click on that and you'll get to see us on YouTube. You'll get to see us continuing this on YouTube. So please come over. Please come over onto YouTube. And we're going to end on Facebook now, but we're going to continue here on YouTube and we're going to talk about what on earth is all this about. What's it about? Okay, folks, thank you for Facebook viewing. Just watch us now on YouTube. We need to get our views and hours up on YouTube. Thank you. All right, folks, broadcasting now only on YouTube. And the reason for that is we've been going on YouTube for about 6 years now, at least, in fact, longer than that. But we never were able to get our subscribers up because we weren't really pushing YouTube. Now, if we really push YouTube, we can get to a minimum of 1,000 subscribers, which is what we really need to get to. And then once we've got that, things can start opening up for us on YouTube. We can start broadcasting outside with a mobile phone on YouTube. We can start monetizing the channel with adverts. We can start doing things like super chats on the chat and so on. And that will bring in an income for our campaigning activities. And as you know, we run very, very frugally. And we rely largely upon people buying our merchandise. And here's a fantastic wee badge that we've got, which is this flag behind us. And we'll put up the link to that. That's our new Union Heart badge. And that's available in our shop. Go to aforceforgood.uk, look along the top, it says shop, and click on that and you'll see everything there in our shop. And another one, of course, is our best-selling Union Heart badge, which says a force for good through the middle of it. And sometimes people buy this for the children If they're sending a card to somebody, they'll stick this in as well. So it's a good way of just getting the message out, and that's a really good seller as well. Thanks. Yeah. Now let's talk about this, giving the vote to foreigners in Scotland. Now, somebody sent us this in the post this week and said, Alistair, what's this about? I've never even heard of this. This has been kept very quiet. Well, correct. I wouldn't expect that you would hear about this, because unless you're a political anorak, you're not going to know what's going on behind the scenes. But we spotted this a long, long time ago. As the song says, in fact, we spotted this. What was the year? It was back in 2013, essentially. We spotted this. Well, 2014 at the time of the referendum. Now, if you cast your mind back, you'll remember that Gordon Brown took it upon himself to make a vow to the Scottish nationalists that they would somehow get more powers. Scotland would get more powers, and he thought that this was a way of getting people to vote to stay part of the United Kingdom. Well, that wasn't an accurate way of looking at it. Studies have since shown that it didn't make any difference to the vote. So he could have just avoided doing that, and the vote would have been approximately the same. However, he did make that vow, as did David Cameron and the other pro-UK party leaders. And what this meant was that after 2014, after the result, they had to deliver on that. So they set up something called the Smith Commission, and this was made up of 2 MSPs from every political party that was in Holyrood, including 2 Greens, 2 SNP, 2 Lib Dems, 2 Tories, and 2 Labour. And they came up with a whole set of ideas, which they formed essentially into a bill, which was taken to Westminster and effectively passed almost in its entirety. It was a huge transfer of powers over to the Scottish Parliament. Now, that happened in what's called the 2016 Scotland Act. Now, we were watching this with growing trepidation, and we analysed the Smith Commission bill, and we wrote it all up in this document called Dissolving, Not Devolving, a Scotland Bill Briefing Alert. And it covered all the problematical parts of the bill, and we showed in forensic depth what would happen if these things were brought in, and it would not be good in the long run for the union. And one of the most concerning things was the devolution of, believe it or not, elections and the franchise. That the franchise, that is who can vote in Scotland, would be devolved to Holyrood. And we wrote up in this document, which you can get from our shop, and we'll put the link up there to Dissolving, Not Devolving. It's a really good unionist education. We said that if you devolve the franchise, all that's going to do is give the Scottish nationalists power to gerrymander the franchise in their the big thing, though, that we complained about here, the thing that we complained about was that they were going to gerrymander. They were going to gerrymander the constitution and the franchise, which they have done. And in 2018, the Green Party, what we call the Scottish Cabbages, the Scottish Cabbage Party, the Soggy Greens, they brought in a bill to change the franchise, because they didn't like the fact that in Scotland you would have to be a British citizen, or you would have to be, say, there's also you can also be a British Commonwealth citizen for some of the Commonwealth countries, and an Irish Republic citizen. But the reason for those sorts of things and the reason for allowing them to vote is because they have a historic connection to the United Kingdom in some way or another. But this bill simply gives everybody who is legally resident in Scotland, regardless of their nationality, the right to vote. So you don't have to be a British citizen. It gives, for example, refugees the right to vote. If you have been granted leave to remain and you're a refugee, you can vote. You don't have to be a British citizen. If you're over here for a few years with your job and you're going back to wherever, you can vote as long as you've got leave to remain here. Now, that compromises the whole idea of national citizenship, because the idea normally is that you want to become a citizen of a country in order to enjoy the benefits, the constitutional and legal and social benefits that citizenship will confer. And that's the reason why people want to change their nationality and become a British citizen, because they can get the right to vote, they can get the right to have a say over what way the country's going, and so on and so forth. So if you say, no, you don't need to do any of that, you simply need to be legally resident, we don't care what your nationality is, you're going to get to vote, then that compromises the idea of national citizenship. It compromises the idea even of the nation state having a citizenship of its own. It compromises I'm going to use the word sanctity of the nation state. It compromises its legally, but also spiritually, because that's essentially what we're up against here, is people who don't believe in the very idea of the nation, of its importance. They simply don't even believe in borders. They just think we should all just be one big mass with no rules and no borders and no nations. And believe me, that is how the Green Party certainly thinks. Absolutely. And it's how most of the politicians of the SNP think. Indeed, there's somebody wrote, the National have got a correspondent who wrote here in one of his weekly articles just a couple of weeks ago. He said, "I'm happy to admit that if I had my way, there would be no geographical borders and no divisions of the people, and we would be governed by the simple human values of universal socialism," he calls it. Well, that's just kind of silly talk. You know, if you want to see how that works out, go to Portland, Oregon, okay, and see the people over there who are trying to enact those principles. What you get, you don't even get, it just degenerates into anarchy, and you don't even have survival of the fittest, you just have survival of the most evil, those who are able to demand their will, because humanity just regresses back to its basic form. And that's what you get. You don't get love and peace, you get anarchy and collapse when you go down that route. So it is like a spiritual battle between those who believe in the concept of order and rules and nation states, which go along with that, and those who believe that, oh, just to hell, quite literally, with all of that. And they're happy just to go along with the carnage. So that's, and of course, they'll make up all sorts of silly little arguments for it, like, oh, we're just being kind to or, you know, we're being fair or whatever. But at the end of the day, the motivation behind it is not a good one. And so what happened was, at the start of the year, I think it was January or February 2020, this went to vote at Holyrood, and unfortunately it got passed. And it got passed because the SNP voted for it, the Greens voted for it, and to their shame, Labour and the Lib Dems also voted for it overwhelmingly. The only people who stood against it were the Tory party. So that means that we have now got, basically anybody can vote, except those who have yet to be granted leave to remain. And that's going to change things, because that's tens of thousands of new people now have been added on. Now, how many people will have been added on? The last statistic I looked at was that there's 380,000 non-British nationals living in Scotland. That was back in 2018. 380,000 non-British nationals living in Scotland. So that's a significant number of people, all of whom, or at least most of whom, will be able to vote at a second referendum should such a terrible thing happen. If, and here's the solution, if the franchise for that referendum is decided by Holyrood. Because there still is another franchise in the United Kingdom, and it's called the British General Election franchise. And that does not allow anybody to vote. And it does not even allow European Union citizens to vote. So that would have to be the franchise that we would have to hold a second referendum on, would be the British General Election franchise, which excludes non-British citizens, other than, as I say, a few exceptions, Republic of Ireland and British Commonwealth citizens. So that's how that happened. I don't think it's a good move, but for our concerns, if there was a second referendum, we would have to argue to use the British franchise, not the Scottish franchise, which is basically just anybody can get a vote in. Some good comments coming in. Mama Mia says, do I get a vote in Pakistan if I move there? Well, indeed, good luck with that. Christopher said that's a good point. A guy makes the point that a second referendum should include Scots in England and the rest of the world. Well, that would certainly be an interesting one. That would be an interesting one. Hey, so folks, please do subscribe to us, by which I mean send us your email and your name so that we can stay in contact with you regardless of what happens with our social media platforms. Now, to do that, go to our website, aforceforgood.uk/support, and you'll see the box there. Put in your name and your email, and that means that we'll be able to send you our email update fortnightly, and we'll be able to be in touch with you regardless of what happens with our other platforms. And we sent out an email update last night where we rehearsed one or two points that we've said in the past, and where we listed all the videos that we've produced in the last fortnight. 10 new videos up on YouTube in the last fortnight. So this is a growing channel, and it's getting growing engagement. And so please do click the button to subscribe, and please do hit the bell for notifications, and we'll be broadcasting every week, doing our Saturday street stall. And it's good at the moment. It's good at the moment, and it's only going to get better. It's only going to get better. And this is October is Black History Month, but as we always say, every day for us is British History Month, regardless of who you are or your particular creed, colour, race or religion. We've got history for you, and we don't make a fetish about who you are. And in this coming week in British history, which is to say from the 10th to the 16th, Friday the 16th, a lot of stuff happened in the past. Back in October 2017, A Force for Good had, we had 2 days in a row, but it was Tuesday the 10th of October 2017, and we stood outside with a strong group of us at the Scottish National Party conference here in Glasgow, flying our Union Jacks with our banner. And we were so delighted to see that the very next day, the 11th of October, the Daily Telegraph cartoonist did this cartoon, which shows Nicola Sturgeon talking, saying, "I will go on and on and on and on and on and on." And there's people leaving out to the group of us in the background, waving our Union Jack. And that was in the Daily Telegraph on the 11th of the 10th, 2017, and we published that in our annual report for 2017. Anybody wants a copy of this? It's a great wee thing. We've still got some copies left. You can just contact us and we'll send you it. Drop us a donation at aforceforgood.uk/donate to one-off donation. Tell us you'd like a copy of this. We'll send you this, and we'll also send you our Union Heart magazines to date, free of charge as well. What else happened on the 10th of October? Well, here is a big one which has changed our lives in ways that many of us won't realize. In 1861, paper duty was removed, the tax on paper, and this led to a boom in newspapers, because prior to Gladstone removing the paper duty on the 10th of October 1861, papers were very expensive. Newspapers were very expensive. Certainly they had been around for a while. The Times newspaper was established in 1785, but the common man and woman on the street did not read newspapers. You had to go to a library, and you had to rent the newspapers also in some cases. So it was, and they were expensive because of the tax on the paper. And there was 3 taxes on the paper. There was advertising tax, and there was stamp duty, and the final one, which was removed on the 10th of October 1861, was paper duty. And that led to a boom in essentially what we were then to come to understand as the mainstream mass media. And what does that do? That introduced the concept of politics to the man and woman on the street. It gave them a new reality that they would be concerned about, or that they felt they had to be concerned about. It introduced all these new ideas and topics to them. They didn't know what was happening hitherto until they got these cheap newspapers, which then, of course, had an effect on the demand for extending the franchise so that these people could take to do with what was going on. So that was a big date in British history. And we, A Force for Good, we discovered that date. We researched it, and we found out what date that was. And it was the 10th of October, 1861. And we'll post about that this evening on our Facebook page. On the 11th of October in 1797, the naval battle of Camperdown was fought, which was the British against the Dutch. The Dutch had been overrun by the army of the French Republic and had been reorganized into a French client state at the time. And it was the British who beat them at the Battle of Camperdown. And it was Admiral Adam Duncan. Now, Admiral Adam Duncan was from Dundee, and he was Nelson's mentor. And Nelson said that the name of Duncan will never be forgot by Britain, and in particular by its navy. So we're always very pleased to remember, to recall to memory Admiral Duncan. And today we have a British Royal Navy destroyer that was built on the Clyde, launched in 2010, called HMS Duncan. So indeed, Admiral Duncan lives on in the Royal Navy, even to this day. He's also got a statue in Dundee. On the 12th of October, Edith Cavell was executed by the Germans in 1915, and she was a British nurse in World War I. And she was charged with harbouring Allied soldiers. And she has a very impressive monument in St. Martin's Place, just off Trafalgar Square, which says, "For King and country, faithful unto death, humanity, fortitude, devotion, sacrifice." And also emblazoned with her words, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness for anyone." A great British hero, Edith Cavell. On the 14th of October, the Royal Oak was sunk in 1939 in Scapa Flow by a torpedo from a German submarine, and that was a massive loss of life. Of the 1,234 men and boys, it's reported that 834 were killed or died later of their wounds. And there's a memorial to that in St Magnus's Cathedral in Kirkwall. 14th of October 1940, another tragedy in Balham tube station, when 66 Londoners who were sheltering from bombs were drowned when water and sewage pipes fractured. That's a disaster that few people know about, perhaps because it's just so horrific. On the 15th of October in 1965, something that we're always amazed by, the Cruachan Dam was opened by Her Majesty the Queen. Now, this is a dam which is built inside a mountain, and it pumps water up and down from two adjacent reservoirs and lochs. And what is incredible about us as well is that we cannot imagine this being built under devolution. Okay, this was built in 1965, when the Secretary of State for Scotland simply had to say, we're going to build a dam inside a mountain. Somebody gets started on that. And a few years later, they built a power station rather inside the mountain. That's amazing. You know, just think what we did. Everything, the entire post-war infrastructure in Scotland was built prior to devolution. Power stations inside mountains, 5 new towns, motorways, bridges. Scotland changed entirely without the need for a single MSP to stick their oar in and mess it all up. It really worked, you know. The administrative devolution which we had, which was the Scottish office just getting on with a day job, that worked very well. It did not, however, satisfy the nationalist streak for Scotland, its separate people to be somehow independent, okay? And that's how the SNP grew up. But as far as getting things done for Scotland and benefiting Scotland, my goodness me, the Scottish office did it far better than Holyrood does it today. As Richard says, too many cooks. Yes, the hydroelectric power station. Hydroelectric power station, quite a remarkable piece of engineering, and I think it was also featured in a James Bond film, The World Is Not Enough. There was 1 or 2 scenes featured in there as well. 15th of October, 1 of 3 identical naval memorials was unveiled. The Portsmouth Naval Memorial, which was designed by Robert Lorimer, and it was the 3rd of 3 identical ones to commemorate sailors who died at sea in the First World War and had no known grave. The others are at Chatham and Plymouth, at Plymouth Hoe. 15th of October 2011, there's a really nice Gordon Highlanders statue in Aberdeen, just off Union Street. That was unveiled by Prince Charles. 15th of October 2011. 15th of October 1702, we're going to research more on this lady this week, but essentially the Scottish woman, she was from a Scottish family. Frances Teresa Stewart died, and she was the model for Britannia, who was to appear on coins right up until the decimal stage. And there was also another woman who I believe was Scottish, Teresa Mackenzie. She was also a model for Britannia as well. And Teresa Mackenzie is featured at the very top of the Mitchell Library, which itself was opened on the 16th of October. 16th of October 1958, the first ever edition of Blue Peter on television. And growing up, Blue Peter was quite influential in my life. And I used to enjoy watching it. I think it was on Tuesdays and Thursdays, come back from school, watch Blue Peter. Those were good days. Need some of that back in my life. And on the 16th of October 1939, the first aerial combat of what was to eventually become known as the Battle of Britain was fought over British skies, and it happened in Scotland over the Firth of Forth, and Glasgow's 602 Spitfire squadron was the winner of that particular battle. And we did a video back in 2013, 5-minute video, which is on this YouTube channel. Please check it out. We'll stick the link up there. There it is. Glasgow's Spitfires drew first blood in the Battle of Britain. Jonathan says, Blue Peter taught us how to build Tracy Island. That's right. And also to do lots of other things with sticky back plastic. Good old John Noakes. What a hero he was. Great British hero, John Noakes. Folks, please hit the subscribe button, and please do hit the bell for notifications. I will be here next Saturday with our 29th Saturday Street Stall, and we're going to be keeping doing this right up to the end of the year, right through next year as well, when we've got some good plans for growing our communication abilities. Thank you to everybody who's been watching today on YouTube and on Facebook. And please do, if you think you've got benefit from it, please do go to our site, consider giving us a donation, but please do get a copy of the wee book for the Union, which is in our shop. This is selling very well. It's a great wee stocking filler, and people just sending it to friends. Everybody says they love it. It's only a £5, postage included. So please do check that out. That's on our shop, wee book for the Union. And we've got other stuff up there, including 3x2 Union Jack flags, Union Jack umbrellas. We've got that dissolving, not devolving booklet that I mentioned earlier, and got a lot of other good intellectual stuff on there. So folks, thanks very much for watching. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen.